Sarah Chen stood at the kitchen counter of James Morrison's luxury penthouse, carefully organizing his breakfast tray as she had done every morning for the past 5 years. The morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, making the marble countertops sparkle. At 42, Sarah carried herself with quiet dignity, her neat black hair pulled back in a practical bun, her simple uniform always crisp and clean. The sound of hurried footsteps caught her attention. James Morrison, the 38-year-old tech millionaire who owned the penthouse, rushed into the kitchen while fixing his tie. His usually calm face showed signs of stress, and his designer suit looked slightly wrinkled, something very unusual for him. "Sarah, I'm having a terrible morning," James said, checking his phone for what seemed like the 100th time. "The power is out at the office building, and I have an important meeting with international investors in 30 minutes. Sarah nodded sympathetically while pouring his favorite morning coffee, Colombian dark roast with a hint of vanilla. "Perhaps you could reschedule, Mr. Morrison," she suggested quietly. James shook his head, running his fingers through his dark hair. "Impossible. These investors flew in from Singapore specially for this meeting." He paced the kitchen, his expensive shoes clicking against the hardwood floor. Sarah watched him for a moment before speaking up. "Sir, if I may suggest something?" When James looked at her, she continued, "Why not have the meeting here? The dining room can seat 12 people comfortably, and I can arrange everything within 20 minutes. James stopped pacing and stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. "Here? But can you handle that kind of setup so quickly?" Sarah gave a small, confident smile. "Trust me, Mr. Morrison, I've arranged many family gatherings in my hometown. Business meetings aren't so different." She didn't mention that those gatherings had often included local business leaders and politicians back in her home country. Without waiting for his response, Sarah sprang into action. She quickly cleared the dining room table, set up water pitchers with lemon slices, arranged notepads and pens at each seat, and even managed to put together a simple but elegant spread of fresh fruits, pastries, and coffee. James watched in amazement as his usually quiet housekeeper transformed his home into a professional meeting space. When the investors arrived, they seemed impressed by the last-minute arrangements. The meeting went perfectly, with Sarah quietly ensuring everyone had what they needed without being intrusive. After the investors left, James sat in his office, thinking about how Sarah had saved the day. He had never really paid much attention to her beyond their daily interactions about household matters. Today, he had seen a different side of her, organized, professional, and incredibly capable. That evening, as Sarah was preparing to leave for the day, James called her into his office. She entered cautiously, wondering if something had been wrong with the meeting arrangements. "Sarah, I want to thank you for today," James said, leaning back in his leather chair. "You really saved me from a difficult situation." "It was nothing, Mr. Morrison. Just doing my job," she replied modestly. James shook his head. "No, it was more than that, which is why I have a rather unusual request." He paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. "Would you attend our company's annual business dinner next week as my guest?" Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. She stood there, clutching her bag, wondering if she had heard him correctly. The annual business dinner was a prestigious event where James's company entertained its most important clients and partners. "Sir, I don't understand," she stammered. "Why would you want your housekeeper at such an important event?" "Because today you showed me that titles don't define capability," James replied simply. "Will you come?" Sarah's mind raced with thoughts. She thought about her simple life, her regular routine of cleaning and organizing, and how different it would be to attend such a high-profile event. She thought about her past life, the business degree gathering dust in her small apartment, and the dreams she had put aside to support her family. Finally, she looked at James and gave a small nod. "Yes, Mr. Morrison, I would be honored to attend." Neither of them knew at that moment that this simple invitation would change both their lives forever. After accepting the invitation, Sarah sat in her small one-bedroom apartment, staring at her savings account balance on her phone. She had been carefully saving money for years, sending most of it back home to help pay for her younger sister's college education. Now, she would need to spend some of it on proper clothes for the business dinner. The next morning, Sarah went to work as usual, but her mind kept wandering to the upcoming event. As she dusted the shelves in James's home office, she noticed the business magazine scattered on his desk. During her lunch break, she picked one up and began reading, remembering her college days when she used to study similar materials. "You're interested in business magazines?" James's voice startled her. Sarah quickly put the magazine down. "I'm sorry, Mr. Morrison, I was just cleaning and—" James raised his hand, stopping her apology. "Sarah, you're going to be my guest at the dinner. You don't need to apologize for reading a magazine." He paused, then added, "Actually, I wanted to give you something." He handed her an envelope. Inside was a gift card to an upscale department store. Sarah tried to return it, but James wouldn't hear of it. "Consider it a thank you for saving my meeting yesterday," he said firmly. That weekend, Sarah visited the department store. She felt out of place among the expensive clothes, but a kind saleswoman named Mary noticed her discomfort and came to help. "First time here?" Mary asked with a friendly smile. Sarah nodded, explaining her situation. "I need something professional but not too expensive." Mary's eyes lit up at the challenge. "Let's find you something perfect." She spent the next 2 hours helping Sarah try on different dresses, teaching her about current business fashion. Finally, they found it, a classic navy blue dress that looked both professional and elegant. It wasn't the most expensive dress in the store, but it made Sarah look like she belonged in a corporate boardroom. With the gift card and her savings, she could afford the dress and a pair of simple black heels. Back home, Sarah opened her laptop, a gift from her sister last Christmas. She began researching proper business dinner etiquette, taking careful notes just like she used to do in college. She practiced holding her fork and knife the Western way, something she had watched James do countless times while serving his meals. Her neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, helped her practice walking in heels. "Back straight, chin up," the older woman instructed, walking across Sarah's living room. "You're not just a housekeeper, my hija. You're a businesswoman who's been hiding in an apron." Sarah spent her evenings watching YouTube videos about business small talk and current market trends. She dug out her old business textbooks from the box under her bed, where they had been carefully wrapped in plastic to protect them from dust. As she flipped through the pages, memories of her college days in China came flooding back. She remembered being at the top of her class, dreaming of working in international business. Life had taken a different turn when her father got sick, and she had to find immediate work abroad to help with medical bills. Housekeeping wasn't her dream job, but it had helped her family survive. One evening, while practicing her dinner table manners, Sarah got a video call from her sister in China. "Gigi, older sister," her sister Lynn said excitedly, "you look different. Are you going somewhere special?" Sarah told her about the dinner invitation. Lynn's eyes filled with tears. "Dad would be so proud," she said softly. "He always said your business degree would be useful someday." Sarah felt her own eyes getting wet. Their father had passed away 2 years ago, but he had lived long enough to see Lynn start college, thanks to Sarah's sacrifices. The day before the dinner, Sarah stayed up late ironing her new dress. She lined up her shoes, her small borrowed clutch purse, a loan from Mrs. Rodriguez, and the simple pearl earrings that were her mother's gift at graduation. Everything was ready. As she finally lay in bed, Sarah's heart beat quickly with both excitement and fear. She had spent 5 years being invisible in the corporate world she once dreamed of joining. Tomorrow, she would step into that world as a guest. She closed her eyes, whispering her father's favorite saying, "Opportunity knocks softly, but it always knocks twice." Little did she know, this dinner would be her second knock. The evening of the business dinner arrived with a mix of rain and nervous energy. Sarah stood in front of her mirror, hardly recognizing herself. The navy blue dress fit perfectly, and her usually practical bun was transformed into an elegant low twist. Her hands shook slightly as she put on her mother's pearl earrings. At exactly 6:30 p.m., Sarah's phone buzzed. The text was from James. "Car is waiting downstairs." He had insisted on sending his personal driver to pick her up, saying it wouldn't look right for her to arrive by bus. The black luxury car looked out of place in front of her simple apartment building. The driver, Thomas, who usually just nodded at her when she cleaned James's cars, now opened the door with a surprised smile. "Miss Chen, you look very different tonight," he said kindly. During the 30-minute drive to the Grand Plaza Hotel, Sarah rehearsed common business phrases in her head. Her hands kept smoothing invisible wrinkles from her dress. Through the car window, she watched as the city transformed from her familiar neighborhood of small shops and family restaurants to the glittering business district with its towering glass buildings. The Grand Plaza Hotel stood like a giant crystal palace, its windows gleaming against the darkening sky. As Thomas helped her out of the car, Sarah's heart beat so loud she was sure everyone could hear it. The doorman gave her a questioning look. He was used to seeing business executives, not women who looked like they were trying to be business executives. Inside the hotel lobby, Sarah's heels clicked against the marble floor as she followed the signs to the crystal ballroom. With each step, she felt more and more out of place. Everywhere she looked, she saw expensive suits, designer dresses, and jewelry that probably cost more than her yearly salary. "Sarah, you made it." James's voice cut through her anxiety. He walked towards her, looking sharp in a black suit. For a moment, she almost greeted him with her usual "Good evening, Mr. Morrison," but caught herself in time. "Thank you for inviting me," she said instead, trying to sound confident. James smiled and led her into the ballroom, where round tables were set with fine china and crystal glasses. Fresh flowers filled the air with a sweet scent, and soft classical music played in the background. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Sarah Chen," James announced as they approached a table near the front. 5 people looked up, 3 men and 2 women, all wearing expressions of polite curiosity. Sarah recognized some of them from business magazines she'd seen in James's office. "Sarah, this is Michael Thompson, our chief financial officer." James began the introductions. Michael, a gray-haired man with kind eyes, shook her hand. "And this is Jennifer Wells, head of marketing." A stylish woman in her 40s gave Sarah a measured smile. As Sarah took her seat, she could hear whispers from nearby tables. "Who is she? Is she a new executive? I've never seen her at any other business events." She pretended not to notice, focusing instead on remembering which fork to use first. The woman sitting next to her, Patricia Rodriguez, no relation to her neighbor, tried to make small talk. "So, Sarah, which company are you with?" she asked, her tone suggesting she was trying to place Sarah in the business world she knew. Before Sarah could answer, a waiter appeared with the first course, a delicate seafood appetizer. Sarah noticed some people at the table struggling with the tiny cocktail fork, and she silently thanked Mrs. Rodriguez for making her practice with different types of cutlery. "Actually," James spoke up, "Sarah is my guest tonight. She showed exceptional business insight during a crucial meeting at my home recently." His voice carried just enough authority to stop any further questioning, but Sarah could still feel curious eyes on her. As the dinner progressed, Sarah found herself relaxing slightly. The food was excellent, though she couldn't help thinking about all the times she had prepared similar fancy meals in James's kitchen. She listened carefully to the conversations around her, understanding more than anyone might expect. Then came the moment that would change everything. Michael Thompson, while discussing Asian markets, made a statement about Chinese consumer behavior that Sarah knew was completely wrong. She sat there, fork halfway to her mouth, fighting an internal battle. Should she stay quiet, like the housekeeper she was supposed to be, or should she speak up, like the business graduate she truly was? Looking at the confident faces around her, Sarah made her decision. She took a deep breath and cleared her throat softly. "Excuse me, Mr. Thompson," Sarah said politely, her voice soft but clear. The table fell silent, and all eyes turned to her. James looked up from his plate, curious about what his housekeeper might say. "Your point about Chinese consumers preferring foreign luxury brands over local products isn't quite accurate anymore," Sarah continued, her hands slightly shaking under the table. "In the past 3 years, there's been a significant shift. Young Chinese consumers now strongly support local brands, especially in technology and fashion." Michael Thompson's eyebrows rose in surprise. He put down his fork and turned to face her fully. "That's an interesting perspective, Ms. Chen. What makes you say that?" Sarah felt her old business school confidence slowly returning. "My family lives in Shanghai," she explained, "and my sister works in retail marketing there. The trend started with brands like Huawei and Xiaomi in technology, but now it's spread to fashion, beauty products, and even luxury items. Local brands have improved their quality while maintaining cultural connections." Jennifer Wells, the marketing head who had barely noticed Sarah earlier, suddenly leaned forward. "Do you have any specific examples?" Sarah nodded, remembering the articles she had recently read. Take Li Ning, for example. It was once considered a low-end sports brand, but now it's competing with Nike and Adidas in China. They succeeded by combining traditional Chinese elements with modern design. Their sales increased by 65% last year. A man from another table had turned his chair to listen. Sarah recognized him as David Chen, no relation, the CEO of a growing tech company. "What about the digital payment market?" he asked. "We've been trying to understand Chinese consumer behavior in that sector." Sarah felt more confident now. This was her chance to show her knowledge. "Digital payments in China are far ahead of the West," she explained. "Even small street vendors in remote villages use WeChat Pay or Alipay. It's not just about convenience. It's become part of the culture. My sister barely carries cash anymore." The conversation at nearby tables had stopped as more people turned to listen. James sat back in his chair, a small smile playing on his lips as he watched his housekeeper command the attention of some of the city's most powerful business leaders. "But what about the older generation?" Michael Thompson asked, now fully engaged in the discussion. "Surely they resist this digital transformation." Sarah smiled, remembering her last video call with her mother. "Actually, the older generation adapted surprisingly well. My mother learned to use WeChat Pay because that's how she sends money to my sister for groceries. The apps are designed to be very user-friendly, with features specifically for elderly users." Jennifer Wells was now taking notes on her phone. "This is fascinating. Our company has been approaching the Chinese market all wrong. We've been focusing on competing with local brands when we should be learning from them." David Chen nodded in agreement. "Ms. Chen, your insights are invaluable. Would you mind if I asked you a few more questions about consumer behavior in Tier 2 and Tier 3 Chinese cities?" Sarah's heart was racing, but not from fear anymore. This was her element, the business world she had studied and loved. She spoke about how smaller Chinese cities were becoming major markets, about the rise of live streaming commerce, and about how local brands were using social media to connect with younger consumers. James watched as Sarah's eyes lit up while explaining complex market trends in simple, clear terms. She was no longer the quiet housekeeper who cleaned his home. She was a business professional sharing valuable insights that could help shape company strategies. The dessert arrived, but hardly anyone at the table noticed. They were too busy listening to Sarah explain how Chinese consumers use social media to make purchasing decisions. She drew examples from her sister's shopping habits and her own observations during her last visit home. What started as a nervous correction had turned into an impromptu masterclass on Chinese consumer behavior. Sarah's simple, real-world examples made complex market trends easy to understand. Her years of reading business news while cleaning James's office had kept her knowledge current, even though she worked as a housekeeper. As the discussion continued, none of the executives seemed to care anymore about who Sarah was or why she was there. They only cared about what she knew, and she knew a lot more than any of them had expected. As the evening progressed, Sarah's initial success led to even more interesting conversations. The business leaders at nearby tables had rearranged their chairs to join the discussion, turning the formal dinner into something that felt more like a business seminar. Sarah found herself at the center of it all, sharing insights that surprised even herself. "Tell us about the mobile gaming market in Asia," asked Lisa Wang, a software company executive who had moved her chair closer. "We're thinking about expanding in that direction." Sarah remembered all the mobile games her sister played. "Mobile gaming in Asia isn't just entertainment," she explained, gaining more confidence with each word. "It's a social activity. People don't just play games. They build communities. My sister spends more time in gaming chat rooms discussing strategies than actually playing." David Chen, who had been typing notes on his phone, looked up with interest. "What about payment systems in these games? We've struggled to understand why Asian gamers are more willing to make in-app purchases." Sarah thought about her sister's spending habits. "It's about small amounts and instant gratification," she said. "In China, people might spend just 1 or 2 yuan. That's like 15 cents on virtual items. The small amount makes it feel almost free, but it adds up for companies." James sat quietly, watching his housekeeper with growing amazement. For 5 years, she had served his meals and cleaned his home, never once hinting at this deep understanding of international business. He noticed how she used simple examples to explain complex ideas, making everything easy to understand. Jennifer Wells, who had been skeptical earlier, was now showing Sarah charts on her tablet. "What do you think about these marketing strategies we're planning for Shanghai?" Sarah studied the charts carefully, the way she used to analyze case studies in college. "The concept is good, but the timing is wrong," she said thoughtfully. "You're planning to launch during the Spring Festival. Most young professionals leave big cities during that time to visit their families in smaller towns. You might want to delay until they return." A waiter appeared with coffee and dessert, but most people at the table were too engaged in conversation to notice. Sarah helped herself to a small piece of chocolate cake, remembering how she usually served dessert at James's dinner parties rather than eating it herself. "Ms. Chen," David Chen said, pulling out his business card, "would you be interested in consulting for our company? Your insights about Asian markets are exactly what we need." He slid his card across the table to her. Before Sarah could respond, two other executives also offered their cards. She accepted them with both hands, remembering proper Chinese business etiquette. Her simple borrowed clutch purse now held 3 business cards from high-level executives, something she hadn't imagined possible when she left her apartment that evening. James watched all this with growing interest. He remembered how efficiently Sarah had handled the crisis meeting at his home, how she'd always seemed to know exactly what needed to be done. Now he understood. She wasn't just naturally organized, she had professional training. During a brief pause in the conversations, while others were distracted with dessert, James leaned closer to Sarah. "Why didn't you ever tell me about your business background?" he asked quietly. Sarah looked down at her plate, arranging her fork and spoon perfectly, a habit from her housekeeping duties. "Mr. Morrison," she said softly, "who would believe a housekeeper with a business degree? Sometimes it's easier to be invisible." James frowned at her words. He thought about all the times she had organized his schedules, managed his household expenses, and handled his domestic staff, all tasks that required business skills he had overlooked. Around them, the other guests were still discussing business opportunities in Asia. Sarah's simple, practical examples had brought the theoretical market reports to life. She had explained complex economic trends using stories about her sister's shopping habits and her mother's banking preferences, making everything relatable and clear. As the evening was winding down, Lisa Wang raised her coffee cup in a small toast. "To Sarah Chen," she said, "who just taught us more about Asian markets in one dinner than our consultants have in a year." The others joined the toast, while Sarah blushed slightly. She looked around the table at the business leaders who were now treating her as an equal, then at James, who was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Something had changed tonight, but she wasn't sure exactly what it meant for her future. As the business dinner came to an end, guests began saying their goodbyes. Sarah stood near the ballroom entrance, still holding the 3 business cards she had received. David Chen approached her one last time. "Ms. Chen, I'm serious about the consulting offer," he said, handing her his phone. "Please put in your contact details. Our company needs someone who understands both Western and Asian markets." Sarah hesitated for a moment before typing in her number. It felt strange using the same phone number she used for housekeeping jobs to enter into a CEO's contacts. As she handed back his phone, she noticed several other executives waiting to speak with her. "Sarah, we'd love to have you visit our marketing department," Jennifer Wells said, now treating her completely differently from the beginning of the evening. "Your insights about young Chinese consumers could help us reshape our entire Asian strategy." James watched all this from a distance, deep in thought. He had known Sarah for 5 years, but tonight felt like meeting her for the first time. He remembered how she always organized his international business magazines by date and region, how she seemed to know which Chinese tea to serve to his Asian business partners. After the last guest left, James asked Sarah to join him in the hotel's quiet lobby. They sat in 2 comfortable armchairs, away from the busy entrance. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She sat at her small kitchen table, the offer letter from James open in front of her, and 3 business cards scattered nearby. The salary mentioned in the letter was more than 5 times what she earned as a housekeeper. Her hands trembled as she made a video call to her sister in Shanghai. "Gigi." Lynn's face appeared on the screen, bright despite the time difference. "How was the dinner? Did you wear the blue dress?" Sarah held up the offer letter to the camera. As she explained everything that had happened, Lynn's eyes grew wider and wider. When Sarah finished, her sister was crying. "Dad always said your time would come," Lynn said, wiping her eyes. "Remember how he made you promise never to give up on your dreams, even when he was in the hospital?" Sarah remembered that moment clearly. Her father, weak from chemotherapy, had gripped her hand and made her swear she wouldn't let her education go to waste forever. She had agreed, though at the time it felt like an impossible promise. The next morning, Sarah went to work at James's penthouse as usual, but this time everything felt different. As she prepared his morning coffee, she noticed business papers on the kitchen counter, documents about Asian markets that she now knew she could understand perfectly. "Good morning, Sarah," James said, entering the kitchen in his usual business suit. "Have you thought about the offer?" Sarah put down the coffee pot carefully. "Yes, Mr. Morrison, but I have some questions." She pulled out a notebook where she had written her thoughts. First, about the training. James smiled, seeing her organized approach. "Let's discuss this properly." He gestured to the dining room table, the same table where she usually served his meals. "Sit down, please, as equals." For the next hour, they talked about the position. Sarah shared her ideas about bridging cultural gaps in business practices. She explained how her experience as a housekeeper had taught her to observe details and understand unspoken needs, skills that could be valuable in international business. "There's one more thing," Sarah said hesitantly. "I want to keep working here 2 mornings a week." James looked surprised. "But why? The salary I'm offering." "Not for money," Sarah explained. "Working here taught me about American business culture. I watched, I listened, I learned. I don't want to lose that perspective." She paused. "Also, this job helped my family survive. I don't want to forget that." James nodded slowly, understanding. 2 mornings a week, but as a consultant, not a housekeeper. You can observe our business meetings, join our conversations. "Deal." "Deal," Sarah said, feeling tears in her eyes. That afternoon, Sarah called the other companies that had offered her consulting work. She arranged to provide insights about Asian markets while working mainly for James's company. Her schedule was quickly filling up with business meetings, very different from her usual cleaning routine. Later that day, Sarah visited Mrs. Rodriguez to return the borrowed clutch purse. When she told her neighbor about everything that had happened, the older woman hugged her tightly. "I told you were a businesswoman in an apron," Mrs. Rodriguez said proudly. "Now we must celebrate." That evening, Sarah's small apartment was filled with the smell of Mrs. Rodriguez's special paella. Her neighbor had invited several other friends from their apartment building. Even Thomas, James's driver who had taken her to the dinner, stopped by with a small cake that said "Congratulations" in blue frosting. As Sarah looked around at her celebrating neighbors, her phone buzzed with messages. There was a text from Jennifer Wells about a marketing meeting next week. David Chen had sent an email about consulting opportunities. And Lynn had sent a photo of their mother crying happy tears after hearing the news. Sarah excused herself and went to her bedroom. She opened the box under her bed and took out her business school diploma, still carefully wrapped in plastic. For the first time in 8 years, she removed it from its protective covering. Tomorrow, she would buy a frame for it. Her father had always said that success was like a delayed letter. It might take time to arrive, but when it came, it would bring all the happiness you had waited for. As Sarah touched the diploma, she whispered, "Thank you, Dad. Your letter finally arrived." 1 year later, Sarah Chen stood at the podium in James Morrison's company conference room. She was presenting the quarterly results of their Asian market expansion to a room full of executives. Her navy blue business suit was different from the borrowed dress she had worn a year ago, but her humble smile remained the same. "Our sales in Asian markets have increased by 200% since implementing our new cultural approach," Sarah explained, pointing to the charts on the screen. The room burst into applause. In just 1 year, her strategies had transformed the company's international presence. James sat at the back of the room, remembering the day he had first discovered Sarah's hidden talents. Now she was one of his most valuable executives, respected not just for her business knowledge but for her unique way of connecting different cultures. After the presentation, Jennifer Wells approached Sarah. "I still can't believe we had such amazing talent cleaning our offices for 5 years," she said, shaking her head. It really taught me never to judge people by their jobs. Sarah smiled, remembering her housekeeping days. Every Tuesday and Thursday morning, she still visited James's penthouse as promised. But now, instead of cleaning, she sat at the dining table with other executives, sharing insights over coffee she had once served. That afternoon, Sarah had a special video call scheduled in her new office, a bright corner room with views of the city. On her desk stood 3 framed items: her business school diploma, a photo of her father, and the original dinner invitation from James that had changed everything. When the video call connected, her sister Lynn's excited face appeared on the screen. She was wearing a graduation gown and holding her own business degree. "Gee, I did it," Lynn exclaimed. "And guess what? I already have a job offer from David Chen's company's Shanghai office." Sarah felt tears of joy forming. Her years of working as a housekeeper had helped put Lynn through business school, and now her new business connections were helping Lynn start her career. "Mr. Chen called me personally," Lynn continued. "He said any sister of Sarah Chen must be special. Can you believe it? You're actually famous in the Asian business community now." Later that day, Sarah attended a special dinner, this time as a host, not a guest. She had organized a monthly gathering where executives and support staff ate together, sharing ideas and stories. The company cleaning lady sat next to the CFO, while the parking attendant chatted with marketing directors. Ms. Chen, a young janitor, asked her during dinner, "Is it true you were once a housekeeper here?" Sarah looked at him warmly. "I still am, in some ways," she replied. "Being a housekeeper taught me to pay attention to details, to understand people's needs before they ask, and to work hard without expecting praise. These lessons help me every day in business." James stood up to make a toast. "1 year ago, Sarah taught us an important lesson," he said, raising his glass. "Talent doesn't wear a name tag or a uniform. It can be found anywhere, if we're willing to look past titles and really see people." After dinner, Sarah walked through the office building, greeting the evening cleaning staff by name. She stopped to help an elderly cleaner with a heavy trash bag, remembering how others had once helped her. In her office, she checked her calendar for tomorrow. She had a morning meeting with Asian investors, followed by lunch with Mrs. Rodriguez, who now ran a successful small catering business with Sarah's help. In the afternoon, she would interview candidates for the company's new internship program, specifically designed for immigrant workers with hidden talents. As Sarah packed her briefcase, she noticed her reflection in the office window. She saw both versions of herself, the careful housekeeper and the confident executive, and smiled, knowing both were equally important parts of her story. Her phone buzzed with a message from James. "Don't forget tomorrow's board meeting. We're presenting your idea about the Immigrant Education Fund." Sarah replied with a thank you, then sent a quick message to her mother in Shanghai. "Mom, remember how Dad always said education never goes to waste? He was right. It just needs the right moment to shine." As she left the office, Sarah stopped to straighten a crooked picture frame in the hallway. "Old habits die hard," she smiled, knowing that sometimes the biggest dreams come true while doing the smallest tasks. Her story had become a reminder that every person, regardless of their current job, deserves to be seen for who they could become.